All right, today we're diving into one of the most influential and definitely one of the most controversial big idea books of our time, Jared Diamond's Guns, Germs, and Steel. And it tackles really maybe the biggest question there is in all of human history. Why did the world end up looking the way it does? Why are some countries rich and powerful and others aren't? So, where does a book like this even begin? Well, it all started with this one simple but incredibly powerful question. It was asked of the author, Jared Diamond, way back in 1972 by a local politician in New Guinea named Yali. And you gotta understand, Yali wasn't asking about genetics or intelligence or anything like that. He knew he and his people were just as smart as anyone else. He was asking about cargo, all the stuff, the technology, the material wealth that Europeans brought with them. Why them and not us? So this book, Guns, Germs, and Steel, was Diamond's massive attempt to answer him. And it became a huge phenomenon. It even won the Pulitzer Prize because it offered this sweeping explanation for global inequality. And this is key. It was an explanation that completely sidestepped the old, ugly, racist arguments about biological superiority. To answer Yali's question, Diamond argues that we have to go way back. We can't just look at recent history, at colonialism or the Industrial Revolution. We have to look for the ultimate cause. And for him, that cause is geography. Diamond has this really great metaphor for this. He says, history is like an onion. You know, the outer layer, that's the world we see today. But to really get it, you can't just look at the last few hundred years. You have to peel back the layers, one by one, going thousands and thousands of years into the deep past to find the real roots of it all. So let's peel back that first layer, right? Let's go all the way back to 11,000 BC, just after the last ice age. And here's the thing. Basically everyone on every continent was on a level playing field. We were all hunter-gatherers. But then you fast forward to 1500 AD, right before European expansion really kicks off, and wow, the world is a completely different and totally unequal place. So the big question is, what on earth happened in that huge gap of time? Well, for Diamond, the answer is pretty clear. The first domino to fall, the single biggest change, was the switch from hunting and gathering to farming. Think about it. Farming can support way, way more people, maybe 10 to 100 times more people in the same amount of space. And once you have a food surplus, not everyone has to spend their day looking for food. That's when you get specialists, soldiers, priests, inventors, bureaucrats. This is where guns, germs, and steel ultimately come from. Okay, but here's where geography starts to play its hand. It's the first big dose of geographic luck. See, farming didn't pop up everywhere at the same time because, well, not every place had the right ingredients. And just look at how lopsided this was when it came to animals you could actually domesticate. Eurasia, they hit the jackpot with 13 big species: cows, pigs, sheep, horses. The Americas, just one, the llama. Sub-Saharan Africa, 0. That is a massive head start in food, fertilizer, and muscle power. And then there's the second piece of geographic luck, which is just mind-blowing when you think about it. It's the literal shape of the continents. Eurasia is wide. It goes east-west. So a crop like wheat, first grown in the Fertile Crescent, could spread like wildfire for thousands of miles because the climate is roughly the same. But now look at the Americas and Africa. They're long. They go north-south. That corn from Mexico, it had to cross deserts and jungles to spread. It was a huge, huge barrier that just slammed the brakes on the spread of farming and new ideas. So this incredible head start in farming wasn't just about having more food. It was about forging the actual tools of conquest. All right, so this slide basically lays out the entire logic of the book in 4 steps. It's a chain of cause and effect that stretches over 13,000 years. It all starts with that geographic luck we talked about, which leads to food production, which then allows for these large, dense, specialized societies. And that's what finally gives you the direct advantages, the proximate causes, as he calls them, the guns, the germs, and the steel. So to really put this theory to the test, Diamond zooms in on one of the most incredible moments in all of world history. It's 1532. You have this tiny group of Spanish conquistadors, led by Francisco Pizarro, 1680 guys, facing the Emperor of the Inca, the biggest, most advanced empire in the New World, with an army of 80,000. I mean, it should have been an absolute slaughter. And it was, just not the way you'd think. Pizarro's tiny force had every single one of those proximate advantages on their side, and every single one was a direct result of Eurasia's long history with farming. They had steel swords and armor, which just shattered the Incas' weapons. They had horses, which were basically tanks to people who'd never seen them. They had guns. They had writing, which gave them access to military strategies from the past. They were backed by a powerful state. And then, most important of all, they had a secret weapon, an invisible ally. And that invisible ally was germs. Diseases like smallpox and measles, they came from Eurasians living packed together with their farm animals for thousands of years. They built up some immunity over time, so when those diseases hit the Americas, where no one had any immunity, it was an apocalypse. Some estimates say up to 95% of the native population was wiped out. And get this, a smallpox epidemic had already swept through the Inca Empire right before Pizarro showed up, killing the emperor and starting a civil war. The empire was already on its knees. Okay, so Diamond's argument is elegant, it's powerful, and for a lot of people, it's really convincing. But for a whole other group of people, it is a deeply problematic and maybe even a dangerous idea. So you have to ask, is geography really destiny? I mean, by tracing everything back to the environment 13,000 years ago, what does a theory like this leave out? Does it kind of suggest that the way the world is today was inevitable? Well, critics have a name for this. They say Diamond's work is a modern version of an old and really controversial idea called environmental determinism. This is the theory that the physical environment itself is what determines how a society develops. And that concept has a pretty dark history because it was often used to justify colonialism, claiming some climates just produced inferior people. So this really gets to the heart of the debate. On one side, you have Diamond, who says geography is the ultimate cause. But on the other side, you have critics who say, whoa, hold on a minute. By focusing so much on the deep past and the environment, his theory basically erases human choice. It pushes things like culture, politics, and the brutal reality of colonialism to the side, making them seem like afterthoughts. And some of the criticism is really strong. Take this quote from the geographer David Correa. He's not just saying Diamond is wrong, he's saying the theory is actively harmful. He says it disinfects the history of colonial violence. Basically, it makes it sound less like a deliberate series of choices and conquests and more like some unavoidable, tragic accident of history. And this isn't just some dusty academic argument about the past. Diamond himself uses these exact same ideas to explain our world today, which really raises the stakes. For instance, he has this idea he calls the Optimal Fragmentation Principle to explain why the Industrial Revolution kicked off in Europe and not in China. He says Europe's geography, all broken up by mountains and rivers, created dozens of competing states. So if one king said no to an inventor, they could just pack up and go next door. But China was this huge unified empire. One bad call from the emperor, like when they decided to scrap their massive treasure fleets, could stop innovation dead in its tracks for the whole civilization. And he applies this idea of optimal fragmentation all over the place. In business, he argues that Microsoft in the 90s was like a mini Europe, with all these competing teams inside, while the old single-minded IBM was like China and fell behind. He compares the chaotic, competitive world of Silicon Valley to the more organized tech scene on Boston's Route 128. And even on a global level, he points out that the countries with the longest histories of farming still tend to be wealthier today. The past, he says, has a really long shadow. But again, for the critics, this is exactly where the theory gets dangerous. They argue it becomes a kind of justification for the world as it is today, an ideology of an imperial capitalism. It lets you explain away poverty, not as a result of politics or economics, but as the sad, unchangeable result of bad geography from thousands of years ago.
So, in the end, it leaves us with this huge, fundamental question that's really at the center of the whole debate. Is our world shaped more by the land we happen to be born on, the plants, the animals, the lay of the land? Or is it shaped more by the choices we make, the systems we build, and the stories we tell ourselves about who we are?